everyone. Welcome to We Go Back. I'm your host, Bryan Abou Chacra, and on this week's episode, we will be reviewing Homecoming and Outlaws, the 15th and 16th episode from Season 1 of Lost. Let's get right into Homecoming. This episode is a little bit more focused on Charlie, and we get to see a little bit of what he's been up to since he's been attacked. So they have found Claire in the jungle. Locke and Boone are able to bring her back to the caves, and she's absolutely terrified. We realize that she does not remember anything since she was on the plane. A little bit of a thing I noticed in this scene is that Jin and Sun, on the outside, not knowing exactly what's going on, even though Sun can understand everything. Jin is very concerned about the baby. And I think that was a really touching aspect to have shown there for Jin. Probably because he was there originally when the baby started kicking, so he feels a little bit of a connection to it. But I also think it was maybe to show you a little bit more about his warm side, not just this kind of callous person we've seen so far. So we move on to having Charlie talk about Ethan, saying it's plain and simple that Ethan is just the bad guy. And I thought that was just an interesting point for him to make, because at this point, yes, he has kidnapped Claire and he has strung up Charlie, but we still don't know why and where he's coming from and what's going on and what his intentions really are. But they have been pretty hostile. His methods have been really hostile, and I mean, it's a pretty fair assumption of Charlie to think that he is the bad guy. But I think that that's an interesting relegation that they have for him there, that they just kind of put him as a bad guy right off to the start. So I just want you to be mindful of certain lines. So that takes us to Charlie back in England with his pal out in the street. They're getting a fix and they're doing drugs, and you find out that Charlie is going to actually grift as well. And what I'm starting to realize about watching Lost and paying a lot more attention to it than I thought I ever have in the past. But, man, everybody in this show is a con artist. You got Shannon, Boone, well, not Boone, but you got Shannon doing it to Boone. You've got Kate, Sawyer, the obvious one, and, just everybody is using other people for their own personal gain before they got to the island. Everyone is some sort of con man, and I never noticed that Charlie had gotten to that point in his, fall from grace with these drugs, but it's another one on the list. We have another con artist in Charlie here. But it's a very interesting contrast about the bad guy, especially in this case here. And that's why I was sort of talking about it. If you look at Charlie in this episode and what he ends up doing to this girl, Lucy, which is funny. Lucy is consistently, as far as I know, referred to when talking about LSD. And then, there's the whole Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the Beatles song, which is supposed to be about LSD and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting that her name is Lucy. I don't know if that's on purpose, but it's something I picked up on. So I just wanted to share it with you guys. But the point I'm making here more than anything is that Charlie is the bad guy to this woman. He comes in, he lies to her about why he's there, why he wants to be with her, and then just steals from her father and makes her look like a complete idiot, as we find out in the episode. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but in that case, I mean, he is the bad guy. So the perspective here is pretty interesting. What methods get Charlie to these means? And why is he so messed up? Well, it's because of the drugs. I wonder if Ethan had that same sort of thing. What is he coming from, and why is he acting the way that he is and harming people? It's something that I did not pick up on until this watch through, but it's a very unique point in the show. So we find Jin and Charlie walking back in the jungle. Jin gets knocked out, and Ethan threatens Charlie with death of one of the survivors on the beach or in the caves. So they're all trying to rally for a plan. And that takes us to Jack and Locke having their conversation of what to do on the beach. And I wanted to point out to you guys, again, the interesting choice in clothing for these two. The little details that Lost puts in the show. Jack is wearing a black shirt and Locke is wearing a white shirt. And I think, it's common so far that Locke has pretty much worn white shirts. I think he's worn gray shirts as well. But I think it's pretty interesting that in this scene, it's pretty clear. light and dark, just like Locke was saying to Walt originally on the beach. Two people at odds with two different ideas about how to do things. One way that's very, gung-ho cowboy like Jack, and then the other way for Jack is for John is a lot more methodical and thinking in war games, not just being a reactionary, but trying to think ahead, because they still have no information. But Jack just is being compulsive. And that takes us back to Charlie. In this scene, he gets upset and goes away and decides not to tell Claire about this plan and what's going on. Just like when he lied to his girlfriend about, conning her and what he was going to be for her, and basically a thief. So it's a very interesting contrast there. We see in these flashbacks, I think, especially at the beginning of the series, we see a lot of mirrored episodes where they encounter the same thing twice in their lives. And we, of course, are going to see both interactions of them and how they respond differently or how they don't respond differently in this case. And here we see Charlie choosing to continue to lie to this woman and continue to lie to Claire. One interesting note that I had here written down, her father works for a paper company or bought a paper company up in Slough. That is absolutely a reference to the original Office from the UK. They're absolutely putting that in there as a little nudge to The Office, which was pretty big at the time too. I mean, they premiered around the same time, so it was a nice little Office reference for you there. So they are putting together this plan on what to do for when Ethan comes, because they are definitely not giving Claire back. And Ethan has made that ultimatum to Charlie: if you don't give her back to me, I will kill one of them, and one of them each day until we get her back, or until you're the last person alive, and I will kill you. So they have people on guard all around the beach with traps and all these things set up. Kate wants to use guns. Jack is really concerned that people are just going to start shooting each other, so he avoids that. But they set up sentries, and Boone takes the first watch. And interestingly enough, Boone falls asleep during his shift. Once again, we have Boone trying to contribute to the group, but falling short in some way. But this scene, I think, is really cool, and what I wanted to point out to you, if you're going back and watching it again, is just that really cool shot of Boone trying to stay awake, and that feeling I think that we've all had where suddenly you're awake. That, I feel like, was captured so perfectly with that shot of Boone sitting there on the beach, slowly falling asleep and then being awoken by the sound. I really want to point that out to you because I thought the music and everything in this episode changes a little bit. It's a little more military almost, and kind of battening down the hatches, and they really, no pun intended, and they really are focusing on a different aspect of this show when they're all getting prepared to try to face Ethan. So I really want you guys to pay attention to the music while it's going on here, and see how it really helps build the mood for the show. So taking us to the backflash with Charlie and the woman's father, I thought it was a very interesting conversation because you see the ultimate struggle in this episode for Charlie, which is that he wants to be able to provide for somebody and take care of somebody. And that's how he feels about Claire. That's why he is so protective of her, and why he isn't necessarily of this woman, but he sort of has this sea change in there and wants to actually be a better man and take care of somebody for the first time in his life. And when he faces his friend with that decision, his friend clams up on him, does not want to give him his fix. He's been doing everything off spec, so now he is in the hole and he wants to get high. And I thought that this was an interesting parallel or contrast, or whatever you want to call it, to how John dealt with him, where he had the stash, but he didn't withhold it from Charlie, and he gave him the choice to come and take it back. Now Charlie does not have the choice, and we see what he's kind of pushed to in the sense of, stealing from somebody and being a criminal just so that he could get his drugs back. Very, very different to what he's actually become on the island. So we do see a progression and a change of Charlie in these subtle scenes with him and his friend, and where he's come from his choices. So I'm happy that they put that in the episode. I thought that was a really cool little acknowledgement to the growth that he's had. And that's going to take us to the first attack by Ethan. Ethan outsmarts everybody, and they find out that they can actually, who knows if he swam or took a boat or whatever, but they can actually come from the water. And that's how Ethan broke their defenses. They didn't even consider somebody coming from the beach. So when he comes and gets Scott and kills poor Scott, not Steve, it's from the water. And that's pretty chilling. Like, this episode with Ethan, like, he was so menacing and really different than anything that you had seen so far in the show. And you're about, like we said, we're about 14, 15 episodes in at this point. So it's a few months in to watching this show. You're like 3 or 4 months in and seeing all this stuff going in and happening. And like, this guy is so totally different from everything else. And I thought that was something that really set the tone for where the show was going to go from that point on. Another little note of something recurring. In this case, Charlie is selling a C815 copy machine. I don't know if you guys picked up on that. 815, 815 is the flight that they were on, and he was selling an 815 copy machine. That's a cool little feature in there. That's absolutely intentional. It's not, for those of you who are watching Lost for the first time, absolutely intentional. It's not an accident that it's in there. But we end up seeing in this scene Charlie completely messing everything up and throwing up on the printer and the copy machine in front of a whole group of prospective clients and just totally making an ass of himself. But the fact of the matter is, Charlie went through with it and actually stole the flask from this woman. Whether his intentions were to give it back or not doesn't matter. He stole it and he got caught in his lie. This woman absolutely doesn't want anything to do with him. And that takes us to the reaction that the survivors have to losing one of their own. Jack, now pushed to the limit, is ready to bring out guns. And they have the 4 guns from the Marshal, the extra gun from Sawyer. All 5 of the guys stake out. You have Saeed, Sawyer, Kate, Jack, and John, and they're all going to use Claire as live bait. She wants to help out in whatever way she can. And they get the better of Ethan, and ultimately Charlie shoots him, which really was a stupid move. Absolutely showing what the essence of the argument of Lucy's father was. Or not argument, but the point that he was saying, that you got to think in the future. Not just the right now. Right now he's pissed. Right now he's angry. Maybe Ethan would have never told them what happened. Who knows? But they didn't get the chance because Charlie couldn't think past the moment that he was in. And he either wanted revenge or wanted to make sure that Claire wasn't going to be harmed again, because he knew, I believe with the effort that Ethan has been putting so far, Ethan would stop at nothing to get her. But I feel like you've captured him now. And that's what we're supposed to all feel. He's captured. Now you want to try to get the information that you can from him. Who is he? Where is he coming from? What's going on? Why are you attacking us and killing people? Like, this guy obviously speaks English, and he's on this island alone, presumably. And where? What's going on? The only other person that we've seen is a crazy woman who crashed on the island from, a science expedition. They could have really gotten a lot from him. Charlie can't see past the future and, acts like an idiot. So it was a very interesting point. Like I said, you'll see the parallels sometimes and in what the flashbacks show you and what the current time does. And for all intents and purposes, this episode, you see Charlie continue to make the same mistakes by choosing to shoot Ethan. And that's a really big theme, I think, of this episode. And honestly, one that I didn't pick up on as much when I watched it the first time. It's been really fun to go back and watch these episodes and see how well they're written, because there's a lot put into them to make it feel more, there is depth. It's not make it feel like there's more depth. There is so much subtlety to it, and it's really cool to be able to go back and look at it with that knowledge of what happens, but also seeing things, like I said, again, for the first time, because I haven't seen them in such a long time. So really, really cool point here. A few things I wanted to bring up while I round out Homecoming is Jack and Sawyer having a conversation about the death of the Marshal, and Sawyer says something that I thought was really cool given what we've seen of Jack so far. He says bygones. It's in the past. He has to let go. He made a decision. That was his best decision at the time. So he has to reconcile that. And I think that exchange is really important because that's what we've seen so far as a hurdle for Jack. He can't just let it go. The way he's responding about Claire being lost, he's, or captured, he blames it on himself and he can't let go of it. He doesn't allow a decision to just be a decision and move forward. He keeps getting stuck on it and tries to fix that decision when it's already been made. And that, I think, is a really interesting point to bring up. Very small, especially because we don't see a lot of, Jack in this episode and what he's going through, but a very nice character point that tells you more about Jack. So that takes us to the end of Homecoming and on to Outlaws. The intro of Outlaws, that opening scene is fucking brutal. I can't believe that they were able to actually show that on TV and it be that graphic. I know they didn't show anything really graphic, honestly, but it's pretty intense. That scene is not tame. It doesn't show you everything, but you have a very clear picture and sound of what's going on, and it's so well done. It really makes you feel that tension with the woman with we find out that Sawyer's mom screaming and crying hysterically and her dad coming in, not saying a word. She tells you everything that's going on. Why do you have a gun? And then bam, and he comes in the room, sits down on the bed, and then bam. And man, I felt really great opening. Awesome sequence, and I thought it was something that if you guys pay attention to again, it's so well directed. I needed to bring it up here. So that wakes up Sawyer, but what we find out is that there's a boar in his tent. And that boar takes his tarp, runs into the jungle. While he's there, now he hears voices. And in voices, all we can pick up is it'll come back around. What the hell does that mean? We don't know yet. But it's something from his past, and that's going to be cool. Anyway, the next day we have Sawyer trying to put the pieces together of his tent, and Saeed comes in. Interesting that Saeed is the one who comes and addresses him, because Saeed is the only one who's also heard voices. So it sets up that really interesting conversation where they both talk about what they've not heard, even though they both absolutely heard whispers in very clear states. They're both trying to blame it on something else. It's absolutely voices that they both heard now. And they're trying to pretend that it's not there. So in our first flashback that we see with Sawyer, he is bringing home a girl, or bringing to his hotel, and he finds an old partner who has a job for him, or not a job, but a favor to pay back, if you will. He wants to make amends for an old job that wasn't good on anybody's terms, and Sawyer said that he would kill him if he saw him next. So we find out Hibbs has been able to find the location of Sawyer's, of Sawyer, actually. Not even Sawyer's parents' killer, but the real Sawyer. And he's in Australia. And they find out that he's running like a shrimp shop. And Sawyer can go finally take revenge if he wants to. Very interesting that this episode focuses a lot on the guns that they had distributed in the previous episodes, especially because a gun ends up being, in the flashback. Again, these episodes will connect, or these flashbacks will connect with each other, and that's what makes it really cool, is that you get to see those direct correlations, like the themes. Like in this case, he's got a gun that he's not going to give back to Jack, because, that was the gun that he took off the marshal originally, and that's kind of his gun, and he's being an ass. And then on the other side, when Sawyer ultimately ends up getting to Australia, we find out that, he buys a gun, which is illegal over there, and is going to kill this guy who ruined his life. So very interesting that this episode is themed around guns and what to do with them. But this also sets up Sawyer needing Kate's help, because he can't track Boar on his own. So Kate, after talking to Jack, wanting to get back all the guns, Jack not wanting to have to deal with Sawyer, she says she can get it back. She comes up with a plan to get carte blanche which is explained in the show. She can ask for anything at any time and doesn't need to give anything in return. And that sets up a very interesting story arc with those two. But before I get into that, I wanted to point out something to you that was a little bit of a sore thumb for me, which was them putting the Sydney Opera House on the shot of Sawyer walking down the harbor. I feel like they could have conveyed that they were in Australia and in a number of ways rather than putting a really fake CGI opera house from Sydney on there to let us know that this is Australia. Like, they could have said Sydney Harbor, whatever you want, like Sydney Maritime Corporation, who knows? Just, I felt like having that big opera house in the background, it was obviously CGI'd on there, kind of took away from it because they shoot the show in Hawaii, and I'm not saying they don't look the same. I have no idea what Australia looks like. Feel like you could have at least had the harbor scene pass off with some other explanation other than this CGI opera house in the background. That's just a little pet peeve of mine. I don't know if you guys really cared or noticed about it, but for me, I felt like there were other ways. Like when they had in Charlie's episode to show that they were in England, you know, I don't know that they showed like Big Ben or anything like in the background necessarily, like so imposing, although if they were in London, it would make sense that they might see Big Ben. But like, you know, in this case, I just felt it was overdone. Whereas in Charlie's, yeah, I know they show like the tube or whatever. I think that's a more subtle way instead of having it be like a specific landmark that people know exactly what it looks like because you've seen it a million times in pictures. That's why it stuck out to me. Again, if you guys disagree with me, please always let me know. WeGoBackPodcast@gmail.com. I'll be happy to read what you guys agree and disagree with. So I like hearing about it all. Please write in. I get a lot of great emails every week, and I love reading them off. I love hearing what you guys have to say. I really want this to be back and forth, not just me talking. I'll say this every single episode because I'm encouraging you to reach out to me. It makes this a lot more fun. Speaking of fun, we have Charlie and Hurley dealing with the body of Ethan, but they have to bury it. And Charlie wants to do it on his own, but Hurley is there to kind of help Charlie emotionally. He's trying to lighten the mood and make a couple jokes that are, you know, light, but he's also getting a assessment for where Charlie's headspace is at because he's very distant and he's worried. Charlie has PTSD. He goes and talks to Saeed about that, which ends up having a really funny encounter about that was the other side. I thought that was a really, really funny point. And it also shows, again, the perspective of the other side. Saeed would have been considered the bad guy during the Gulf War, but here he is with all the other survivors on this island trying to live together. Matter of perspective. That's his home country he was defending, and the American troops were there basically infiltrating. So, interesting perspective, and it's interesting that he has that conversation again with Saeed because he knows what Saeed, or kind of knows what Saeed used to do in the Republican Guard. So that takes us to our nice little trek with Kate and Sawyer trying to find this boar that has a personal vendetta against Sawyer. And the first night they end up playing the game I Never. The rules of that are explained in the show as well, but basically it's a drinking game. And Sawyer has gotten all the liquor from the plane and held it up in his stash. So they're having this nice little session, and through that we find out Kate really just wanted to spend a little bit more time with Sawyer and get to know him better. And by the end of it, they find out that they both actually killed a man. So we know that Kate has actually killed somebody, which is a very interesting point, because up until this moment we didn't know what she did, and we don't necessarily know if this is what got her on the run from the law, but we do know that it is for sure because it was alluded to in the episode with finding the plane, that plane belonged to somebody that she killed, but we didn't know if that was true or not because of the questioning that they had. In this case, we know because they're playing the drinking game, and I think she's a lot more open about her criminal past. And they also drink a lot of alcohol. I think they each had like 3 or 4 of those bottles. That gets you messed up. They wake up the next morning. Sawyer's shirt's been peed on. This boar really does not like him. It's not happy with who he is. But that leads to them, John Locke, who finds them in the jungle and sees their camp, sits down and has a conversation with Kate and Sawyer. And then as the conversation goes on, he starts to, as he tells this story about this dog that used to come and be with his mother, he's really focusing the conversation to Sawyer. And I thought that was really cool. I never noticed that he was speaking directly at Sawyer. And we're seeing John explain something here, which is this concept of the dog came to to his mother to sort of give her relief for the loss of her daughter, and almost to say it was okay. Like, that's really the point that Locke is making here, almost as if he knows what Sawyer is dealing with, or maybe he's just open to seeing what it is. Who knows? But he is definitely directly talking about this situation to Sawyer, at him, about maybe pursuing this animal and seeing what happens. This is the same information that he gave to Jack when Jack was trying to follow the image of his father in the jungle. And it did actually lead him to water. So maybe this will lead Sawyer to the resolution that he's looking for. But very, very interesting that it was just pointed right at Sawyer and the conversation that they have. So in Sawyer's flashback, he goes to encounter the man who ruined his life and ends up not pulling the trigger and killing this guy. That takes him to a bar where he runs into Christian, Jack's father, who's sitting there completely wasted off of his ass and does not have any money to pay for his drink, and has left his wallet. What I thought was really interesting about this scene is that it's shot like a confessional. Again, very subtle imagery in Lost about theism and religion. And it's shot like a confessional with a small bit of light coming in, and Christian sitting in the dark talking to himself, and he's almost giving his last rites to Sawyer, like giving his confession to Sawyer when he tells him about his son and how he could fix all the problems that he's caused with his son by a simple phone call, but he is weak and he can't do it. And because of that, motivates Sawyer to go do what he had set out to do, which I thought was very interesting, that Jack's father was able to be more supportive in a way to Sawyer than he could be to his son. And he knows that. It's very clear in this scene. He says he's weak and his son is a better man, a great man, and better than he ever will be. And that is something that really he should have told his son. But we find out, he dies shortly after that. But Sawyer does go and actually pull the trigger finally, and finds out that he's been set up by his old partner Hibbs. This guy, Frank, whatever his actual name was, owed Hibbs money, and Hibbs just put it out. That was it. He's done, and had him killed, and had Sawyer do it for him. And that was pretty crazy, because then we find out his last words are what we've been hearing in the whispers the whole time, which is, it'll come back around. And maybe that is what is the main case here for Sawyer. When he ultimately confronts this boar and they have their stare down, unlike his decision to pull the trigger and kill that man who was innocent, though this boar had messed with him and actually had a reason to be killed for him to be angry against, and they could use the meat as well, Sawyer elects not to shoot. And here we see that comparison where the growth occurs. Last episode, we see Charlie not being able to overcome his own, negative background. But in this episode, we see Sawyer prevail over himself. This is a choice that he made for himself, to not just be stupid and kill this boar. He doesn't shoot the gun, and Charlie does. And again, very interesting that we have these two episodes back to back with each other. But really, really big point for this, and a really different Sawyer that we've seen so far. I want to bring up some of the moments with Saeed trying to talk to Charlie about PTSD, and where he's at, and know that this is going to be with you for the rest of your life. And I think Charlie, who so far has had a very huge tendency to sulk, actually decides to go and do something about it, and agrees finally to go on a walk that he had earlier rejected from Claire. And they go and have their nice, beautiful walk. But one of the biggest endings, I think, in Lost is this one here on this episode, where Jack and Sawyer are having their conversation, and Jack says the exact same words that his father said to Sawyer about the Red Sox never winning the World Series. That, I think, is so perfect because we all realized, and then we realized that Sawyer did too. It wasn't just one of those things where it's like, hey, we all know, a character also got it. And he, as a con man, didn't necessarily say anything to him. And didn't bring up that maybe that was his father and what his father had said. I don't know why, because I'm fairly certain that they both know, or that Sawyer knows, because we know that it's his father. That's Jack's dad, and it's a very unique exchange that they have. And maybe it's because he didn't feel Jack was ready, because Sawyer finds out his father died, and that's why he's not on the crash or on this plane. But, I mean, his coffin is. But maybe that was the reason. It wasn't good timing. And he withholds that information, and very interesting. We've now seen two, I guess, character connections, but these are of a character and a secondary character. Both of them actually having to do with Sawyer, which is pretty interesting now that I come to think of it. So, let me take us into this week's emails. This week's emails are a little bit more on the fun and complimentary side, so I'll keep those pretty short. I do have one question that I want to answer, and that question is from Omar. He says, "What was Jack's father doing at the bar alone without a wallet? He sounded drunk when he first spoke to Sawyer. Do you think he sweet-talked the bartender, or did he have some cash on him, or was he literally just hanging out there with no money?" I think he got there, he ordered a drink, and realized he had no money, and was hoping the next person would pay for his drink. Because I think he asks for Sawyer to pay for his drink, and then he starts to drink with Sawyer. I believe so, if I remember it correctly, but I could be wrong. Otherwise, I think Jack's dad, I think Christian, had just been drunk all day. I think he had gone to Australia for whatever reason and had just been drinking the entire time. So it doesn't matter what time you found him, he was drunk. So the next email is from Byron. This is more of a compliment, but he does bring up something that I want to share with you guys. He said, "I'd been thinking about Lost a lot recently and wanted to watch it again. So your podcast was the perfect excuse to start. And this time, watch it at a slower pace and keep up with your show. I'm going to let my friends who watch Lost know about it too, since I'd love to see it and continue through the end." So that point is great. Please let your friends know who love Lost, because I would love to know their opinions. This doesn't have to just be, me talking to you guys. Every single time I'll tell you, I want to know what you guys have to say. Share it with other people who might have questions about the show but are interested in watching it again, because I think it might help some of those folks who are kind of stuck on issues with Lost get into it, because they have somebody to ask who's watched it and been through it, and I'm passionate about explaining it to people. So I'd be more than happy to help you guys and your friends. Next email from Juliet. She says, "Just caught your podcast for the first time, and I think it's very insightful and enjoyable, very professional, plus you sound very comfortable talking through it all by yourself. I'm a huge fan of Lost, having probably seen every episode at least 10 times, and I love all your character observations. You point out a lot of small things on this watch through that I never caught on to. Keep up the good work, because in no time, I suspect you're going to get me into another rewatch." That's cool. Thank you so much, Juliet. I really appreciate your email. I hope I read your name right. And I am super appreciative of all of the positive feedback. Like all my emails this week were great, wonderful words of encouragement. I had an email from Joe who just said, "Love the podcast. Fred got me into it. Doing a rewatch now. Great opinion and point of views." Guys, that's fantastic. I am so happy you guys are enjoying this show, because I really love doing this show, and I love hearing what you guys have to say, what your thoughts and theories are. I'll say it every week. Send them to wegobackpodcast@gmail.com. I try to respond to as many as I can. I try to read as many as are relevant when I'm on the show, so that it is like a community. I really enjoy it. If you guys want to follow me on Twitter, @KingLordBryan will be the place to find that. I have these set up on YouTube on a playlist, so any episode that's 2 weeks older or back will be on my YouTube. Everything else will be on iTunes and SoundCloud, which you can find links for everywhere else. Otherwise, how are you listening to this video? But like I said, always send in your emails, always send in your thoughts, always send in your wonderful, wonderful compliments. I'd be happy to read them and talk to you guys about whatever you want to. Guys, next week we are going to be watching and reviewing In Translation and Numbers. These episodes are going to be really fun. I really look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about them. And until next week, thank you for tuning in. Take care.